A witch performing a baptism. Blessing or curse? Welcome to Midnight Radio Drama. I am your host, Wilfred. Drop a comment and share where you're tuning in from. Your thoughts make this mystery come alive. Let's begin. It was a damp and blustering Saturday morning in Flaxborough, the kind of day when the cobbled street seemed to sigh under the weight of overcast skies and Wellington boots. The annual flower show was underway at the market hall, an event as reliable as the town clock, but as unremarkable as the town itself. Housewives in floral frocks manned stalls of begonias and dahlias, while elderly gentlemen wandered about, discussing the merits of petunias as if the fate of the nation hung upon it. Inspector Purbright stood near the refreshment table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea and watching the proceedings with his usual air of polite detachment. The market hall smelled faintly of damp wood, boiled cabbage from the neighbouring cafe, and the subtle undertone of human gossip fermenting in its corners. It was precisely the kind of occasion when nothing of consequence should happen, yet Flaxborough, with all its genteel ordinariness, was about to prove otherwise. The hubbub of mild compliments and gardening advice was interrupted abruptly by a commotion at the far end of the hall. Mrs. Edith Granger, the town's self-appointed arbiter of decorum, had taken offence to a rather unexpected visitor. "I simply cannot allow it," she declared, her voice sharp enough to curdle the tea. "That woman, she shouldn't be here." Heads turned. The woman in question stood with an unruffled composure that seemed to defy Mrs. Granger's protest. She was middle-aged, wearing a plain black coat, her silver hair tied back with severe neatness. A glint of steel behind her spectacles suggested a fortitude that might withstand even Flaxborough's well-meaning inquisitiveness. "I'm sorry to cause a stir," the woman said quietly, "but I'm here to observe the flower arrangements. I am not a troublemaker." Mrs. Granger sniffed loudly. "Observing is one thing, but your presence here, after what you've done, well, I think the town ought to know." Purbright stepped forward with the gentle authority he wielded like a walking stick rather than a cudgel. "Mrs. Granger, might I ask you to explain yourself?" The woman's eyes flicked towards Purbright with a brief, unreadable expression. "My name is Mrs. Tabitha Crowley," she said calmly. "I baptize babies, among other things." A few nearby listeners exchanged glances. Baptizing babies was, after all, an entirely respectable vocation in Flaxborough. What was the problem? Mrs. Granger's face reddened. "Baptizing babies? That's exactly the issue. You performed a baptism here last week, but without the vicar's permission." A murmur spread through the crowd. The vicar was a pillar of the community, known for his kindly but firm manner and a neat waistcoat, embroidered with crosses. Purbright observed the rising tension. "Mrs. Crowley, do you wish to comment on this?" She inclined her head slightly. "I did perform a baptism for little Samuel Hayward. His mother requested it. She feared that the vicar's schedule would not permit a timely ceremony." A pause. "And the vicar, sir?" "I was not consulted." The crowd seemed to bristle at the prospect. Baptisms were sacred matters, not to be meddled with by outsiders or rivals. Purbright made a note to himself, the first wrinkle in what appeared to be a perfectly mundane morning. Meanwhile, a small boy tugged at the hem of Mrs. Granger's skirt, whispering something inaudible. She shooed him away with a glance sharp enough to curtail even childhood curiosity. "Perhaps we should allow Mrs. Crowley to stay and observe the show," Purbright suggested mildly, "while we clarify any misunderstandings. After all, this is Flaxborough, and our community thrives on civility." Mrs. Granger did not look convinced, but no one else seemed eager to escalate the matter. As the crowd dispersed back to their begonias and marigolds, Purbright's eyes lingered on Mrs. Crowley, who was quietly arranging her hat. There was something in her measured calm that did not quite fit with the mild scandal brewing around her. Flaxborough's orderly rhythms had been disrupted by a baptism, of all things, a baptism done without permission. And the whispering was only just beginning. So the flower show resumed its low murmur, but in the minds of many the question hung. What else might Mrs. Crowley bring to the town beyond her quiet presence and unorthodox ceremonies? Purbright sipped his tea once more and made a small mental note. This might not be just another flower show. The following Monday morning broke with an uncharacteristic chill that seemed to seep into the bones of Flaxborough. The streets were slick with overnight rain, and the usual gentle bustle of market day felt slightly subdued, as if the town itself was holding its breath after the weekend's unexpected uproar. Inspector Purbright arrived at the police station with his customary slow step, his mind already occupied by Mrs. Tabitha Crowley's unsettling presence at the flower show. His office was modest, cluttered with neatly stacked files, a small wooden clock ticking insistently on the wall, and a faint aroma of old leather and pipe tobacco. Purbright settled behind his desk, allowing himself a brief moment to review the notes he had made while observing the Saturday event. It was not often that a baptism performed without the vicar's sanction caused a ripple significant enough to require official attention, yet the weight of Mrs. Granger's complaints, amplified by the local grapevine, warranted at least a quiet inquiry. Before Purbright could fully settle, Sergeant Stokes entered, balancing a cup of coffee and a sheaf of newspapers. "Morning, sir," he greeted, his voice a blend of curiosity and routine. "Have you heard? There's been more talk about Mrs. Crowley already. The Haywoods aren't pleased." Purbright inclined his head thoughtfully. "More than a baptism, I suspect." Stokes sat down with a thud and offered a thin smile. "Indeed, seems little Samuel's baptism has stirred up old family quarrels. Mrs. Hayward's sister, Miss Priscilla, has taken it upon herself to complain to the vicar, the town council, and anyone else who will listen. It's caused a bit of a stir." The inspector folded his hands calmly. "Family grudges tend to be the true currency of Flaxborough, Sergeant. Please arrange for me to speak with the Haywoods as soon as possible. The situation merits delicate handling." Stokes nodded, gathering his papers. "Understood, sir. Also, the vicar's secretary stopped by earlier. She seemed keen on discussing Mrs. Crowley's credentials. Something about her not being recognized by the parish." Purbright raised an eyebrow. "Unsurprising, considering she operates independently. We must tread carefully. Any sign of interference in religious matters can inflame the delicate sensibilities here." As the sergeant left, Purbright's gaze drifted to the window overlooking the town square. Flaxborough's orderly facades hid more undercurrents than met the eye, and Mrs. Crowley seemed to have arrived as a catalyst. By mid-morning, Purbright found himself at the Hayward residence, a neat Victorian terraced house smelling faintly of boiled potatoes and lavender polish. Mrs. Hayward, a prim woman in her early 40s, greeted him with a curt nod, while her husband lingered behind, a man of few words but watchful eyes. "Inspector," Mrs. Hayward began briskly, "I am grateful you've come. This baptism, though a blessing for my son, has divided the family. My sister Priscilla insists it was improper, even scandalous." Purbright inclined his head politely. "I understand, Mrs. Hayward. May I ask what specifically concerns Miss Priscilla?" "She believes Mrs. Crowley is no more than a meddler, someone trying to gain influence under false pretenses. The vicar has always conducted our ceremonies with the proper solemnity. This sudden baptism done quietly feels like an affront." Mr. Hayward cleared his throat. "It's not just about ceremony, sir. There's talk that Mrs. Crowley has other motives. Some say she's involved with a circle of folk who dabble in unorthodox practices." Purbright noted the hushed tone, the careful choice of words designed not to offend but to suggest doubt. "Mrs. Crowley denies such claims?" Mrs. Hayward's lips tightened. "She says what she pleases, but Flaxborough is a small town. Rumours spread quickly." After taking his leave, Purbright's mind turned to the nature of those rumours: folk magic, independent baptisms, social fractures, the ingredients for a mystery that would require a careful balance of observation and restraint. Back at the station, Purbright arranged a meeting with the vicar, Reverend Algernon Truscott, a dignified man with a soft voice and a penchant for tweed jackets that seemed almost ceremonial. The Reverend welcomed the inspector into his study, walls lined with books on theology and local history. "Inspector Purbright, to what do I owe the pleasure?" the Reverend inquired, offering a well-worn armchair. "It concerns Mrs. Tabitha Crowley, Reverend. I understand there has been some tension regarding her recent baptism of young Samuel Hayward." The Reverend sighed, fingers steepled. "Yes, a most unfortunate situation. Mrs. Crowley operates outside the established parish. While her intentions may be sincere, her methods are unorthodox, and that unsettles many here." Purbright allowed a moment's silence. "Has the parish received complaints?" "Numerous, I'm afraid. It is not simply the act itself, but the manner in which it was conducted, a deed without consultation, without ceremony. It upsets the order we have carefully maintained. Moreover, some in the congregation whisper of her association with certain unconventional groups." Purbright leaned forward, his tone measured. "Groups such as?" Reverend Truscott hesitated briefly. "There are rumours of New Dawn gatherings, a small faction advocating a return to old customs outside church doctrine. Mrs. Crowley's name has surfaced in such conversations." The inspector nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Reverend. It will be useful to understand the wider context." Leaving the vicar's study, Purbright mused on the complex social tapestry of Flaxborough. Here was a community fiercely protective of its traditions, yet quietly riven by undercurrents of change and suspicion. His next step was to visit Mrs. Crowley herself. Her lodgings were a modest flat above a second-hand bookstore, its windows dusted with the fingerprints of curious children and nosy neighbours. Purbright found her in a small sitting room, seated by a window overlooking the bustling High Street. "Inspector," she greeted him with a calm smile, "I trust you are not here to trouble me further." "On the contrary, Mrs. Crowley, I hoped to hear your perspective firsthand." She gestured to a chair. "Please do sit. I'm aware that my presence has caused some consternation, though I only wish to serve the community in my own way." Purbright observed the quiet confidence she exuded, an air of resolute independence, tempered by civility. "Mrs. Crowley, can you explain what motivated you to perform the baptism without the vicar's knowledge?" Her gaze was steady. "Mrs. Hayward came to me in distress. The vicar was away on a retreat, and her son was gravely ill. She wished for a baptism before it was too late. I did what I believed to be right." "Understandable," Purbright said. "Yet the town's concern seems to be about procedure and tradition." She nodded. "Flaxborough clings to its traditions, but sometimes they must be reconsidered in the face of human need." The inspector allowed the moment to linger, then asked quietly, "There are rumours about your connections to certain groups. Would you care to address them?" Mrs. Crowley's lips curved slightly. "I am acquainted with many in Flaxborough, including those who seek spiritual renewal in unconventional ways. But I am no troublemaker. I hold no secret agenda." Purbright accepted her answer for now, filing it away alongside other fragments of the puzzle. As he departed, a sudden knock at the door startled him. Outside stood Miss Priscilla Hayward, her expression tight with disapproval. "Inspector Purbright, may I have a word?" He gestured her inside, bracing himself for a polite but pointed interrogation. Flaxborough's quiet streets concealed more than begonias and polite chatter. Beneath the surface, the seeds of discord were beginning to sprout. The investigation had only just begun. The day wore on, and the town's gossip mills ground with increasing vigour. At the railway buffet, a group of regulars gathered, their conversation revolving not around train times or the weather, but the brewing scandal. "Did you hear? That baptism wasn't just irregular, it's downright improper," said Mr. Wilcox, a retired schoolmaster, known for his prim disposition. Mrs. Landry, owner of the town's hair salon, sniffed delicately. "I heard Mrs. Crowley's been seen with some peculiar folk, moonlight meetings and the like. Flaxborough doesn't need such influences." Another voice chimed in. "And what of the Haywards?" Poor Samuel caught in the middle of all this fuss. The chatter painted a picture of a town divided, some defending the sanctity of tradition, others whispering of hidden motives and social upheaval. Purbright, hearing of these murmurs through his contacts, recognized the patterns well. Small towns could be kind, but they could also be merciless. And often, the truth lay buried beneath layers of half-truths and assumptions. That evening, as twilight softened the town's outlines, Purbright returned to his papers, determined to untangle the web that had begun with a simple flower show and a baptism gone quietly awry. There was more beneath the surface, and he would find it, in due course, with patience and a steady hand. The following morning, a thin mist curled through the narrow lanes of Flaxborough, softening the edges of shop signs and chimney pots alike. The town awoke with a muted energy, as if still digesting the weekend's ripples stirred by Mrs. Tabitha Crowley's unsanctioned baptism. For all the quiet civility beneath the surface, the well-tended facades of the market town concealed an undercurrent of unease. Inspector Purbright took his usual measured route to the station, his mind occupied with the day's itinerary. The delicate balance between neighbourly discretion and official inquiry had begun to tip, and he knew that more voices would seek to weigh in on the matter. His first appointment was with Miss Priscilla Hayward, the vicar's most vocal critic of Mrs. Crowley. She had requested a meeting at the town's genteel cafe, a place redolent of fresh scones, strong tea, and the faint hum of quiet gossip. Purbright arrived promptly, greeted by the sight of Priscilla already seated, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Inspector," she began without preamble, "I appreciate you taking the time. I must confess, I find Mrs. Crowley's presence deeply unsettling." "Good morning, Miss Hayward. I am here to understand the concerns, not to judge prematurely." She inclined her head curtly. "Very well. You must understand that this baptism was not merely a breach of protocol. It was, in many eyes, a deliberate challenge to the authority of the church and the community." Purbright sipped his tea quietly, letting the statement hang. "A challenge, you say?" "Yes. Mrs. Crowley operates outside the parish. She has no official recognition, yet she dares to perform sacraments. It undermines the vicar and unsettles the faithful." "And the Hayward family's role in this?" Miss Hayward's gaze sharpened. "My brother and sister-in-law were desperate, yes, but also naive. Mrs. Crowley preyed upon their fears." Purbright made a mental note of the choice word. Preyed. It bespoke a belief in deliberate manipulation rather than accident or necessity. "Are you aware of any particular motivations Mrs. Crowley might have? Any agenda?" Priscilla's lips pursed. Rumours abound of her associations with the New Dawn Circle, a group with curious practices to say the least. They meet at odd hours, in secret places. It is whispered they dabble in rites, that contradict Christian teachings. Purbright allowed a slight smile. Rumours can be misleading, Miss Hayward. She nodded, though without conceding the point. True, but one cannot ignore the possibility, especially when a stranger arrives and disrupts the social order. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young man, neatly dressed, and carrying a bundle of papers. He introduced himself as Mr. Charles Miller, the local journalist from the Flaxborough Gazette. He had been following the story closely and requested a brief word with the inspector. Purbright obliged, understanding that the press, however discreet, would soon make the matter public if it had not done so already. "Mr. Miller," Purbright said, "I trust you have been thorough in your inquiries." "Certainly, Inspector, but the townsfolk are eager for details, and Mrs. Crowley's shadowy reputation has only fueled their curiosity." "Please exercise discretion. The investigation is ongoing, and premature speculation may do harm." Miller nodded earnestly, promising restraint. With the journalist dispatched, Purbright continued his day's work. He arranged to visit several key figures who might shed light on Mrs. Crowley's background and the mysterious New Dawn group. First on the list was Mrs. Clara Bennett, a retired schoolteacher, a known community historian whose memory stretched back decades and whose connections reached every corner of Flaxborough society. At her cosy home, Mrs. Bennett welcomed Purbright with a warm smile and an offer of homemade ginger biscuits. "You want to know about Mrs. Crowley, do you?" she asked, pouring tea. "A curious woman, that one. Not originally from here, no. Came to town about 2 years ago. Quiet, kept mostly to herself, but always polite." "Any connection to unusual groups?" Purbright asked. Mrs. Bennett considered. "Well, there have been whispers about a New Dawn, a small group interested in reviving ancient customs. They hold gatherings in the old chapel on Church Lane, which has been disused for years. Some think it's harmless nostalgia, others suspect something more." "And Mrs. Crowley's involvement?" "She's said to attend occasionally. The group's led by one Mr. Edgar Hemsley, a retired university lecturer with a taste for the arcane." Purbright jotted down the name. "Anything else I should know?" he asked. Mrs. Bennett gave a knowing look. "Flaxborough likes its secrets tucked away neatly. People are cautious about what they say, but beware of what's left unsaid." Leaving Mrs. Bennett's house, Purbright pondered the delicate balance of tradition and change in the town. The old chapel, the group meetings. These were threads worth following, but cautiously. His next visit was to Edgar Hemsley himself, a man whose appearance matched the eccentricity whispered about. Purbright found him ensconced in a study cluttered with books on folklore, mysticism, and theology. "Inspector Purbright," Hemsley greeted, voice calm but with a hint of challenge. "I gather you have questions about our little gatherings." "Indeed, Mr. Hemsley. Flaxborough is concerned about the nature of New Dawn and Mrs. Crowley's association." Hemsley smiled thinly. "We meet to explore spirituality beyond the confines of the established church. There is nothing nefarious in that. Yet some see it as undermining tradition." "Tradition, yes, but traditions evolve. Mrs. Crowley is sincere, and she acts with compassion." Purbright listened carefully, noting Hemsley's tone, neither defensive nor secretive, but quietly assertive. "Have your meetings involved any rituals or practices that might cause alarm?" "Only the renewal of old customs long forgotten. Nothing to frighten a sensible person." Purbright filed this away, yet remained cautious. In Flaxborough, even harmless curiosity could be misread. Later that afternoon, news reached Purbright of an incident at the town council meeting where Mrs. Granger had again voiced strong objections to Mrs. Crowley's role in the community. At the council chambers, the atmosphere was thick with polite tension. Mrs. Granger stood at the lectern, her voice crisp and deliberate. "It is my firm belief," she declared, "that Mrs. Crowley's presence here is a threat to the moral fabric of Flaxborough. Her unapproved baptisms and associations are unbecoming of our town." Council members exchanged guarded glances. The mayor, a portly man with a carefully trimmed moustache, called for calm. "We must consider the facts before passing judgment," he said. "Inspector Purbright is conducting inquiries." Mrs. Granger was unmoved. "With respect, sir, the facts are plain to see." Purbright watched quietly from the back, noting the layers of social rivalry and suspicion that coated the accusations. Returning to his office later, he reviewed the day's notes. The picture was growing more complex. A woman acting outside established channels, a secretive group reviving old customs, family feuds sharpened by fear and prejudice. Yet beneath it all, a certain polite civility endured. Before closing for the evening, Purbright called in Sergeant Stokes. "Arrange for discreet observation of the new dawn meetings," he instructed. "I want to understand what actually takes place." Stokes nodded. "Understood, sir." As the town settled for the night, Purbright felt the familiar tug of patient inquiry. The answers would come in time, he knew, through quiet listening and careful watching. Flaxborough's calm was deceptive. Beneath its surface, secrets stirred, and the inspector was ready to uncover them, step by step, with the quiet precision that had made him trusted by many and feared by a few. The mystery of the witch who baptized a baby was far from resolved. The following evening, as the gas lamps flickered along the streets of Flaxborough, a thin veil of mist curled over the rooftops, lending the town an almost spectral air. The new dawn meeting was scheduled to convene in the old chapel on Church Lane, and Inspector Purbright, cloaked in the discretion of a plain overcoat and modest hat, prepared to observe without intrusion. The chapel had long since lost its congregation, shuttered years ago when dwindling attendance rendered its upkeep unsustainable. Now its faded stone walls and stained glass windows bore the marks of time, ivy weaving silently along the outer walls. Inside, the air was cool and faintly scented with incense, a subtle but deliberate choice. Purbright entered quietly, taking a seat near the back where the soft scrape of his shoes would go unnoticed. The room was sparsely lit by candles, their flames dancing shadows onto the peeling plaster. A small group of townsfolk had gathered, some familiar faces from the local council, others less so. At the head stood Edgar Hemsley, who was speaking in measured tones about the significance of reconnecting with ancient rites, not as rebellion, but as a deeper understanding of human nature and the cycles of life. Mrs. Crowley sat among the attendees, poised and attentive. There was no chanting, no overt ritual. The proceedings resembled a book club more than a secret society, discussions punctuated by polite debate and the sharing of poetry and folklore. Purbright noted the lack of anything to justify the more sensational rumours he'd heard. Still, he was mindful that appearances in Flaxborough could be deceiving. As the meeting drew to a close, the inspector observed discreet conversations at the edges. He noted that Mrs. Crowley spoke privately with a tall man Purbright had not met before, his dark coat pulled tight against the chill, eyes sharp and observant. After the group dispersed into the night, Purbright lingered briefly, then slipped away to digest what he had seen. Returning to his office, he found a neatly folded letter on his desk. It was unsigned, but carried a single line scrawled in neat, precise handwriting. "Beware the quiet ones who baptize in shadows." The note, enigmatic and thinly veiled, set Purbright's mind alight with possibilities. Who had left it, and what did it truly mean? The next morning, at the town's venerable coffee house, Purbright met with Sergeant Stokes and shared the letter. "Someone wants us to look harder at Mrs. Crowley," Stokes murmured. "Could be a warning or a threat." "Indeed," Purbright said, folding the note carefully. "We must consider both possibilities." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Edith Granger, her expression a mixture of triumph and concern. "I hear you attended the New Dawn meeting last night, Inspector," she began sharply, "and no doubt saw for yourself how dangerous such gatherings are." Purbright inclined his head politely. "I observed a group discussing folklore and poetry." "Nothing alarming, Mrs. Granger?" She sniffed. "You underestimate the subtle influence these people wield. There are forces at work that respectability cannot always see." Purbright smiled gently, a twinkle of irony in his eyes. "Flaxborough has long been adept at seeing just enough and ignoring the rest." Mrs. Granger huffed and took her leave, leaving Purbright to muse over the delicate dance of suspicion and civility. Later that day, Purbright visited the Hayward household again. This time, Priscilla was present, her demeanour less rigid but no less sharp. "Inspector, I must insist that more be done to prevent Mrs. Crowley's influence from spreading," she said firmly. "My brother and sister-in-law are torn, and the community must be protected." Purbright listened, weighing each word carefully. He sensed genuine concern, but also the undercurrent of social rivalry and fear of change. "Miss Hayward," he replied, "our role is not to suppress, but to understand. Mrs. Crowley's actions must be examined, but we must avoid making enemies where none exist." The day's events revealed a town at a crossroads between tradition and transformation, suspicion and acceptance. That evening, as Purbright prepared to leave the station, a message arrived, a telegram from a distant relative of Samuel Hayward, expressing alarm at the baptism circumstances and requesting a meeting. Purbright's notebook was filling quickly. The pieces were numerous, the motives tangled. Yet beneath the town's polite veneer, a quiet tension simmered, and somewhere within that tension lay the truth. Inspector Purbright woke to a pale dawn filtering through the curtains of his modest lodgings. The soft light seemed to settle uneasily over Flaxborough, as if the town itself anticipated an unravelling. The events of the past week, the baptism, the secretive New Dawn gatherings, the swelling whispers, were threads tugging at the fabric of the community's calm. With deliberate pace, Purbright dressed and set out for the town's courthouse, where a meeting had been arranged with Mr. Alfred Hayward, Samuel's distant uncle. The man's arrival had stirred a new sense of urgency. Distant family ties often brought with them old resentments and the promise of fresh complications. The courthouse, an austere building of grey stone and sober arches, seemed particularly solemn under the low clouds gathering overhead. Purbright found Mr. Hayward waiting in the antechamber, a stout, middle-aged man with a thin moustache and a pair of sharp, assessing eyes. "Inspector," he greeted curtly, offering a firm handshake, "I've heard troubling things about the baptism. My nephew's welfare is at stake, and I intend to see it protected." Purbright gestured to a seat. "Please, Mr. Hayward, I am here to listen." Alfred Hayward wasted no time. "That woman, Mrs. Crowley, is an interloper. Baptizing a child without the Church's sanction is a serious matter. It calls into question the boy's place in our faith and community." "Understandable concerns," Purbright acknowledged. "But Mrs. Crowley claims her actions were prompted by urgency, given Samuel's health." Hayward's jaw tightened. Urgency or not, proper channels exist. This flouting of protocol threatens the family's standing and the town's order. As they spoke, Purbright detected a hint of old family grievances beneath the surface, concerns less about spiritual matters and more about reputation and control. "Mr. Hayward," Purbright ventured carefully, Are you aware of any previous disputes within the family concerning such matters?" Hayward hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There have been disagreements, matters best left unspoken, but Mrs. Crowley's actions reopen old wounds." Purbright filed the information away. The baptism was not merely an isolated act, it resonated through tangled family history. Later that morning, Purbright returned to the old chapel on Church Lane to speak once more with Edgar Hemsley. The lecturer was immersed in a new volume on folklore, glasses perched low on his nose. "Mr. Hemsley," Purbright began, "I understand that the New Dawn group holds regular meetings. I would like to attend as an observer to better understand your activities." Hemsley regarded him thoughtfully. "You are welcome, Inspector, though I doubt you will find anything scandalous." Purbright smiled gently. "Still, appearances matter in Flaxborough." As arrangements were made, the inspector's thoughts returned to Mrs. Crowley. Her quiet strength was at odds with the town's suspicion, but there was something elusive about her motivations. The afternoon brought a summons from the vicar, Reverend Truscott, requesting a private audience. Purbright made his way to the vicarage, a tidy house with well-tended gardens. "Inspector," the Reverend greeted warmly, "thank you for coming on such short notice." "There are developments, Reverend?" "Indeed. Mrs. Crowley has been seen speaking privately with Mrs. Granger. Given their opposing views, I fear tensions may escalate." Purbright nodded. "It is important to monitor such interactions carefully." They discussed the delicate social web woven between Flaxborough's residents, alliances, grudges, and the unspoken rules governing their conduct. As Purbright left, a note was slipped into his hand by the vicar's housekeeper, discreet and unremarked. It read simply, "Watch the quiet observer, she sees more than she says." That evening, the inspector returned to his office to find a gathering of voices, a soft murmur of reports and rumour collected by Sergeant Stokes. "Sir," Stokes began, "there's been talk at the railway buffet. Some claim Mrs. Crowley was seen visiting a local apothecary late at night." Purbright raised an eyebrow. "And what is the significance?" "The apothecary, Mr. Lister, is known for his discretion and herbal remedies. Some suggest Mrs. Crowley sought more than flowers." The inspector smiled thinly. "Flaxborough's imagination is fertile, but we must differentiate speculation from fact." Still, the detail was worth noting. Before closing for the night, Purbright penned a note to the apothecary, requesting a discreet conversation. As he prepared to leave, a soft knock interrupted him. Mrs. Crowley stood at the door, her expression calm but serious. "Inspector, may I speak with you? There are matters I believe you should know." Purbright gestured her inside, curious and cautious. She spoke in a low voice, eyes steady. "I did not come to disrupt Flaxborough. My actions were guided by compassion, but there are forces at play, old resentments and fears that may cloud judgment." Purbright listened, aware that beneath her measured words lay a deeper story. "I am willing to cooperate fully," she continued, "but I ask for understanding and patience. This town has secrets, and I am but a part of the unfolding." The inspector nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Crowley. Your candour is appreciated." As she left, Purbright reflected on the complexity of the case. Beneath the polite surface, Flaxborough's social fabric was fraying, and the inspector was determined to weave the threads back together, one quiet conversation at a time. The week unfolded with the steady rhythm of Flaxborough's market days and council meetings, yet beneath the routine a subtle tension threaded through the town's daily discourse. Inspector Purbright found himself navigating a labyrinth of social nuances and guarded confidences, each step revealing a little more of the quiet unrest stirred by Mrs. Crowley's baptism and the enigmatic New Dawn gatherings. On Tuesday morning, Purbright called upon Mr. Leonard Lister, the apothecary whose late-night consultations had stirred local gossip. The shop was a cramped, cluttered place, scented with dried herbs and the faintest trace of menthol. Behind the counter, Lister was a thin man with keen eyes and a cautious manner. "Inspector," Lister greeted, his voice low. "I heard you wished to speak." Purbright nodded. "I understand Mrs. Crowley has visited you recently. Is there anything you can tell me that might clarify the situation?" Lister glanced toward the back of the shop, then leaned in slightly. "Mrs. Crowley came seeking remedies for a child, a baptismal baby, I gather. She was concerned for his health. Nothing unusual, but I advised caution given the circumstances." "And anything else? Anything out of the ordinary?" Lister shook his head. "She's a private woman, keeps her own counsel, no signs of trouble, no strange rituals beyond what one might expect of a healer." Purbright made a note of the apothecary's words, the careful balance between openness and reserve characteristic of Flaxborough's folk. Leaving the shop, Purbright encountered Miss Priscilla Hayward in the High Street. She greeted him with a mixture of civility and cool appraisal. "Inspector," she began, "I trust your inquiries are progressing. The community awaits your judgment." Purbright smiled gently. "I am here to understand, Miss Hayward. There is much more beneath the surface than initial impressions suggest." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I hope you do not underestimate the damage caused by Mrs. Crowley's actions." As she departed, Purbright pondered the complex layers of loyalty and suspicion, gratitude and resentment that wove through the town. The following day brought the scheduled New Dawn meeting, and Purbright attended as an observer, his presence unobtrusive but alert. The gathering was held in the old chapel once again, where the faint scent of incense mingled with the murmurs of conversation. Edgar Hemsley led the discussion, now focusing on the symbolic meanings of ancient rites and their relevance to contemporary life. Mrs. Crowley contributed thoughtfully, her tone measured and sincere. Purbright noted the absence of any overt rituals or practices that might raise alarm. The group appeared more a circle of intellectual and spiritual curiosity than a clandestine sect. Yet the town's whispers told a different tale, shaped by fear and misunderstanding. After the meeting, Purbright approached Mrs. Crowley for a brief conversation. "Mrs. Crowley," he began, "the group's intentions seem benign, yet the town's concerns persist. How do you respond to that?" She looked thoughtful. "Fear of the unknown is natural, Inspector, but I believe openness and honesty can bridge many divides." Her calmness was a steady anchor amidst the swirling rumours. Later that afternoon, Purbright visited the vicar once more. Reverend Truscott received him in the study, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the well-worn carpet. "Inspector," the Reverend said, "I have been reflecting on the divisions within our community. Mrs. Crowley's actions have revealed fractures we might have preferred to ignore." Purbright nodded. "Change often stirs unrest, Reverend. The challenge is to guide it gently." The Reverend sighed. "Indeed, I fear some in Flaxborough are more concerned with appearances than with genuine faith." Their conversation drifted to the importance of compassion and understanding, themes that resonated with Purbright's own approach. As evening fell, Purbright reviewed his notes and observations. The mystery was less about a crime and more about the delicate balance of tradition and transformation, fear and acceptance. Yet, as always, in Flaxborough, even the quietest ripples could swell into waves. Before closing for the night, Purbright asked Sergeant Stokes to keep a discreet watch on Mrs. Crowley's movements, not out of suspicion, but in the interests of understanding. Flaxborough held its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The week wore on with the steady cadence of Flaxborough life, market stalls rising early, the clatter of cups in the railway buffet, the occasional tiff at the town council. Yet beneath this veneer of normality, Inspector Purbright sensed the quiet currents of unrest swelling, stirred by Mrs. Crowley's presence and the baptism that had unsettled the town's delicate equilibrium. On a blustery Thursday morning, Purbright found himself at the vicarage once more, where Reverend Algernon Truscott greeted him with a wary smile. "Inspector," the Reverend began, "there is something I must confess. I have received an anonymous note, much like your own, warning of those who baptize in shadows. It seems the unease runs deeper than we anticipated." Purbright nodded thoughtfully. "The community's anxieties are manifesting in unusual ways, Reverend." The Reverend sighed, fingers steepled. "Indeed, I worry for Flaxborough's soul." Later that day, Purbright met with Mrs. Edith Granger in the town library. Quiet, wood-panelled room, lined with dusty volumes and the faint scent of old paper. Mrs. Granger was a woman of precise habits and a sharp tongue, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "Inspector," she said crisply, "the trouble with Mrs. Crowley is not merely her baptismal escapade. It is what she represents, a challenge to our social order, to our respectability." Purbright inclined his head. "Change often unsettles." She sniffed. "Unsettling is putting it mildly. She has disrupted the harmony we have cultivated for decades." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Charles Miller, the local journalist, who bore news from the town council meeting that very morning. "Inspector," Miller said, "the council is divided. Some seek to formally censure Mrs. Crowley, others advocate tolerance. It is becoming a matter of political manoeuvring." Purbright's lips twitched in a faint smile. Politics often complicate matters beyond necessity. The day progressed with a string of interviews and quiet observations. Purbright noted subtle exchanges, a glance held a moment too long, a carefully measured phrase, the half-smile of concealed rivalry. In the early evening, Purbright returned to the old chapel on Church Lane, where the New Dawn group was scheduled to meet again. This time he arrived unannounced, blending seamlessly with the small assembly. The discussion that night turned toward the symbolism of baptism and renewal, themes both ancient and deeply personal. Mrs. Crowley spoke with gentle conviction, reminding the group that spiritual care transcended rigid structures. Purbright observed the participants, some earnest, others more skeptical, absorbing the words but guarded, as if afraid to admit their hopes or fears aloud. As the meeting concluded, Purbright lingered by the door, catching a brief, tense exchange between Mrs. Crowley and a man he recognized as Mr. Arthur Penn, a prosperous local businessman with ties to the council. Their conversation was hushed but charged, a careful dance of words layered with meaning. Purbright resolved to learn more about Penn and his connection to the unfolding drama. Returning to his office late that night, Purbright found a visitor waiting, Sergeant Stokes, bearing news that would deepen the mystery. "Sir," Stokes said quietly, "there's been a second incident, a disturbance at the Hayward home last night." Purbright's interest piqued. "Explain." "Apparently, someone broke a window and left a note taped to the sill. It read, 'The past will not be buried.'" Purbright felt the familiar pull of the unsaid, the quiet menace lurking beneath polite facades. He gathered his coat and hat. "We must visit the Haywards at once." The night air was cold and sharp as Purbright and Stokes approached the modest terraced house. Neighbours peeked through curtains, whispers carried on the wind. Inside, the Haywards appeared shaken but composed. Mrs. Hayward showed him the torn curtains and the crudely written note. "This is intimidation," she said softly. "Someone wants us to reconsider our actions." Purbright examined the note carefully. noting the handwriting's uneven scrawl and the deliberate vagueness. "Have you any idea who might wish to threaten you?" he asked. Mrs. Hayward shook her head. "Only that it is connected to the baptism and Mrs. Crowley." Purbright's mind raced through the tangled web: family feuds, secret gatherings, social anxieties. Back at the station, he reviewed the evidence and testimonies. The case was no longer simply about a disputed baptism. It had become a reflection of Flaxborough's deeper tensions between tradition and change, fear and acceptance, power and vulnerability. As dawn approached, Purbright sat alone with his thoughts, aware that the story was far from over and that the next move would be crucial. The following morning, the streets of Flaxborough woke under a fragile calm that belied the undercurrents roiling beneath its polished surface. Inspector Purbright, seated in his office with a steaming cup of tea, carefully reviewed the growing collection of notes and observations. The window beside him framed a view of the market square, where stalls were beginning to appear amid the quiet murmur of early traders. The previous night's incident at the Hayward residence, an act of intimidation thinly veiled beneath polite society's veneer, had unsettled the town in subtle ways. Whispers filled tea rooms and pews alike, but none dared voice accusations outright. Flaxborough was a place of delicate balances where even a broken window threatened to tip the scales. Purbright's thoughts returned to Mrs. Crowley. The woman's calm defiance in the face of suspicion had intrigued him from the start, yet the recent events suggested that others were less forgiving. His first call of the day was to Mr. Arthur Penn, the local businessman whose hushed conversation with Mrs. Crowley the week before had caught Purbright's attention. Penn's office was located in a converted townhouse near the market, its interiors a tasteful mixture of dark wood and brass fittings. The man himself was affable, with a quick smile and an eye that missed little. "Inspector," Penn greeted warmly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Purbright got straight to the point. "Mr. Penn, I understand you've had recent dealings with Mrs. Tabitha Crowley. I'd like to know more about the nature of your association." Penn's expression remained polite but guarded. "Mrs. Crowley is an acquaintance. We share some mutual interests in local heritage and preservation. I admit I was surprised by the controversy surrounding her baptism." "Have you noticed any tensions arising from her involvement in the community?" Purbright asked carefully. Penn hesitated. "There are always undercurrents in a town like Flaxborough. Some welcome change. Others resist it." The inspector filed the answers alongside others, noting the artful vagueness. Next, Purbright visited the Hayward household once more. The family's composure was steadier now, though the air still carried an unspoken apprehension. "Inspector," Mr. Hayward began, "this latest act, breaking a window and leaving that note, it's more than mere vandalism. It's a warning." Purbright nodded. "We will do everything to ensure your safety. Have you any suspects?" Mrs. Hayward looked down. It could be anyone, those who resent Mrs. Crowley's presence, or old family disputes rekindled by recent events. Their words reinforced the sense that multiple strands of tension intertwined like roots beneath the town's tidy surface. Later that afternoon, Purbright arranged to meet with a new figure who had recently arrived in Flaxborough, Miss Helena Marsh, a solicitor's clerk with a reputation for discretion and insight. Rumour had it she was quietly interested in the New Dawn group and its participants. At a small cafe overlooking the river, Miss Marsh spoke candidly. "Inspector," she said, "Flaxborough's charm is its secrets. Mrs. Crowley is a catalyst, yes, but the undercurrents run deep, long-standing rivalries, grudges, and a yearning for change that unsettles many." Purbright pressed for details. Do you believe these tensions could lead to further incidents? Miss Marsh considered. It's possible. When respectability is threatened, people can act in unexpected ways. Her words lingered in Purbright's mind as he left the cafe, the soft murmur of the river accompanying his thoughts. That evening, news arrived of a second note discovered, this one left at the doorstep of the old chapel where the new dawn met. It bore the same cryptic warning: the past will not be buried. The message, repeated and placed with deliberate intent, suggested a slow escalation, a warning that the town's uneasy peace might soon fracture. Purbright gathered his files and prepared to share his findings with Sergeant Stokes. "We must tread carefully," he said. "The threat is no longer abstract. It is aimed directly at those who would challenge the status quo." Stokes nodded. "Do you think Mrs. Crowley is in danger?" "Perhaps," Purbright replied. "But more than that, Flaxborough itself is at a crossroads. Our task is to ensure the truth comes to light before resentment turns to violence." As the night deepened, the inspector sat by the window, gazing out at the town that had so quietly and thoroughly captured him. Beneath its prim exteriors and polite smiles, Flaxborough simmered with secrets, waiting for the moment when the surface would finally break. And Purbright knew he would be there when it did. The cool autumn dusk settled over Flaxborough as the gas lamps flickered to life, casting soft pools of light along the cobbled streets. The air was tinged with the faint scent of burning coal and wood smoke, the familiar comforts of a town slipping into evening. Yet within the comforting routine, Inspector Purbright sensed the weight of a gathering storm. In the quiet of his office, he pored over the latest reports and notes, mapping the intricate web of personalities and tensions that had come to define this case. The repeated warnings, the broken window, the anonymous notes, the whispered threats, all pointed toward an escalation that demanded careful handling. Earlier that day, Purbright had arranged a discreet meeting with Mrs. Crowley, hoping to gauge her perspective on recent events. She greeted him at her modest cottage, the faint glow of lamplight flickering through lace curtains. Her composure was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of weariness. "Inspector," she said quietly, "I had hoped these troubles might pass as quickly as they began." "Troubles rarely do, Mrs. Crowley, but I want you to know we are here to protect, not to accuse." She nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Thank you. There are many in Flaxborough who fear what they do not understand." "Change is unsettling," Purbright agreed, "but it can also be an opportunity." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young messenger handed Purbright a note, this one marked with a simple, elegant seal, a twisted branch entwined with a serpent. He broke the seal and read the message: "Meet me where the old stones stand midnight. Come alone." The cryptic summons sent a ripple through Purbright's mind. Was this a threat, a plea, or a trap? That night, under a sky veiled with clouds, Purbright set out alone toward the ancient stone circle on the outskirts of town, a sight long steeped in legend and whispered superstition. The stones loomed in the moonless dark, their silhouettes stark against the shadowed fields. Purbright's footsteps were steady but cautious as he approached the center. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, a woman wrapped in a dark cloak, her face partially obscured. "Inspector Purbright," she said softly. "I knew you would come." "Who are you?" Purbright asked, eyes narrowing. "I am Helena Marsh," she replied. "There are truths you must hear, things that the town is not ready to face." Purbright gestured for her to continue. She spoke of old grudges tied to families long intertwined with Flaxborough's history, of secrets buried beneath layers of politeness and appearances. Mrs. Crowley, she explained, was more than an interloper. She was a catalyst, uncovering fractures some wished to keep hidden. "Those notes, the threats, they are warnings," Marsh said. "But there is something more dangerous at work." Purbright listened intently, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. As dawn threatened to break, Marsh handed him a folded document, a ledger detailing transactions and meetings linking several prominent town figures to the New Dawn group in ways that suggested influence rather than mere curiosity. "Consider this carefully," she said. "Not all who claim respectability are innocent." Purbright pocketed the ledger, gratitude mingling with caution. Returning to town, he pondered the complex motives entwined with social standing, power, and fear. Back at the station, Sergeant Stokes awaited, eyes bright with anticipation. "Sir, what have you uncovered?" Purbright smiled thinly. "A tangled web, Stokes. The quiet ones often hold the sharpest secrets." As the day unfolded, Purbright planned a subtle maneuver, a polite but pointed meeting to unsettle those who wielded influence in shadows. Flaxborough, for all its calm, was about to confront its hidden heart. The morning dawned with an unremarkable calm over Flaxborough, the mist rising gently from the fields and the first rays of sun glinting on shop windows. Yet beneath this placid surface, the town's usual rhythms beat with an added tension, as if everyone sensed the gathering storm. Inspector Purbright arrived at the town hall shortly before the weekly council meeting, his demeanour as composed as ever, though his mind was alert to the subtle shifts in the social landscape. Today promised a convergence of many threads: the families, the council, the New Dawn circle, and Purbright intended to use the occasion to apply a quiet pressure to see which faces betrayed unease. The council chamber was already filling with familiar figures, each adorned in their characteristic airs of civility and guarded ambition. Mrs. Edith Granger was engaged in animated conversation with Mr. Arthur Penn, whose earlier interactions with Mrs. Crowley had drawn Purbright's particular attention. Meanwhile, Priscilla Hayward, resolute and stiff-backed, took her seat with the dignity of someone prepared to make a point. Purbright took his place near the back, eyes scanning the assembly, noting the careful politeness masking unspoken rivalries. As the meeting commenced, the mayor introduced a general business item, a proposal to discuss Mrs. Crowley's activities and their impact on the community. Mrs. Granger rose promptly, her voice clear and firm. "Esteemed colleagues, it is no secret that Mrs. Tabitha Crowley has caused considerable consternation with her unauthorized baptism and associations with questionable groups. I propose we formally censure her to protect Flaxborough's values and traditions." Murmurs of assent and dissent rippled through the chamber. Priscilla Hayward followed, advocating caution. "While I understand the concerns, we must avoid rash actions. Let us seek to understand before condemning." Purbright allowed the debate to unfold, the careful dance of words and glances revealing the underlying tensions. When the discussion paused, Purbright requested permission to speak. "May I offer an observation?" he began, voice measured. The room fell silent. Flaxborough prides itself on community and tradition, but it must also recognize the complexities of human nature and change. Mrs. Crowley's actions have sparked unease, yes, but our response must be tempered by fairness and understanding. He spoke of the importance of examining facts rather than rumors, of listening to all voices before passing judgment. His words, though gentle, carried an unmistakable weight. As the meeting concluded, Purbright arranged a private gathering in the town's small tea rooms, inviting key figures whose influence shaped the town's direction. Mrs. Granger, Mr. Penn, Priscilla Hayward, and Edgar Hemsley were among those present. Over cups of tea and delicate pastries, Purbright steered the conversation toward the recent events, probing gently but purposefully. He highlighted discrepancies in statements, subtle contradictions, and the shared undercurrents of fear and misunderstanding. At one point, he posed a question to Mr. Penn, his tone casual but incisive. "Mr. Penn, some suggest your involvement with the New Dawn group goes beyond heritage interests. Would you care to clarify?" Penn's smile faltered momentarily. "I assure you, Inspector, my interests are purely cultural." Purbright pressed no further, but noted the tension. Turning to Mrs. Granger, he observed, "Strong convictions are admirable, Mrs. Granger, but might they sometimes cloud judgment?" She bristled, but held her ground. The meeting concluded without dramatic revelations, but with a palpable shift, a subtle realignment of positions, and the opening of fissures long concealed. Later that evening, Purbright convened a final interview with Mrs. Crowley in his office. She arrived calm, composed, yet with an unmistakable gravity. "Inspector, I trust you have gathered what you need." "Mrs. Crowley, your candour has been invaluable. There are still questions that linger." He laid out the patterns he had discerned, the family tensions, the social rivalries, the quiet manipulations behind the scenes. "And what of the threats and warnings?" she asked. Purbright met her gaze. "Those come from fear of change, of loss, of exposure." She nodded slowly. "I did not come to unsettle, but to heal." His final question was gentle, but pointed. "Mrs. Crowley, what is your true connection to the New Dawn?" She smiled faintly. "A seeker, like many here, not a witch, not a threat, only a woman who cares." Purbright allowed a moment of silence before standing. "The truth is seldom simple in places like Flaxborough, Mrs. Crowley, but understanding is the first step toward peace." As she left, Purbright reflected on the tangled tapestry he had unravelled, small-town secrets, petty rivalries, quiet courage. Tomorrow, the town would awaken again, its balance forever shifted, but for now there was clarity and a measure of calm. The morning sun cast a pale, diffused light over Flaxborough, as if the town itself was still waking from a long and uneasy night. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, a reminder of the season's inevitable change. Inspector Purbright stood at the window of his modest office, quietly observing the slow, familiar bustle of the market square below. The usual chatter and footsteps seemed tinged with something new, an undercurrent of expectancy, as though the town was bracing itself for an unfolding truth. The events of the past weeks had brought Flaxborough to a delicate crossroads. The baptism that had initially seemed a minor irregularity had blossomed into a revelation of hidden grudges, social maneuverings, and the restless undercurrents beneath the town's genteel surface. Yet, as always, it was the quiet patience of understanding rather than loud accusation that Purbright believed would guide the resolution. His thoughts turned to the New Dawn group, which had now become both a symbol of hope for some and a source of unease for others. The chapel on Church Lane stood silent in the morning light, its ivy-clad walls concealing the whispered meetings and shared confidences within. It was here that much of the mystery had quietly taken shape, and it was here that Purbright had arranged a final gathering. As the clock struck 11, a small circle of figures assembled in the chapel's modest hall. Mrs. Tabitha Crowley, Edgar Hemsley, Priscilla Hayward, Mrs. Edith Granger, Mr. Arthur Penn, and, of course, Inspector Purbright himself. The atmosphere was civil, though the undercurrents of tension and unresolved questions lingered. Purbright began gently, his voice steady but inviting. "We have shared much over these weeks, yet some matters remain to be clarified. I hope today we can bring light to the shadows that have so unsettled this town." He paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "Mrs. Crowley, your baptism of Samuel Hayward set events in motion that revealed more than just a question of ceremony. It revealed the fragile bonds and old grievances beneath Flaxborough's calm exterior." Mrs. Crowley nodded thoughtfully. "I only sought to offer comfort where there was fear and uncertainty. It was never my intention to sow discord." Purbright turned to the others. "The concerns expressed were not without foundation. The town's traditions and values are deeply held, and any challenge to them is bound to provoke resistance." He then spoke of the notes, the broken window, and the warnings, emphasizing that fear often disguised deeper truths. "Mr. Hayward and Miss Hayward," Purbright addressed the family representatives present, "your unease stemmed not only from the baptism itself, but from feelings long buried, matters of family pride and unresolved tensions." Priscilla's eyes flickered with a mix of regret and resolve. "Inspector, it is true that the Hayward family has its complexities. But perhaps this event has forced us to confront them rather than hide behind appearances." Mrs. Granger, ever the voice of order, spoke next. "The situation revealed how fragile our social fabric can be. We must guard against division while respecting our heritage." Purbright nodded. Indeed, it is the balance of respect and openness that sustains a community. He then addressed Mr. Pennsylvania. "Your involvement with the New Dawn group, while initially seeming peripheral, was more significant than many realized. Your support lent the movement a credibility that unsettled some but encouraged others." Penn offered a measured smile. "I have always believed in preserving Flaxborough's heritage, even if that means embracing new perspectives." The inspector allowed the conversation to flow, gently uncovering the intertwined motives, fears, and hopes that had shaped the drama. As the meeting drew to a close, Purbright spoke with quiet authority. "The truth is not a single story, but a tapestry of human concerns, fear and compassion, tradition and change, pride and humility. Mrs. Crowley's baptism was the catalyst, but the true issue lies within us all." The gathering dispersed with a sense of resolution, if not complete harmony. Flaxborough would not be the same, nor perhaps did it need to be. Later that afternoon, as the town resumed its gentle routines, Purbright sat once more in his office, penning his final report. The case had revealed the depths beneath polite society, but also the possibilities of understanding and growth. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sergeant Stokes entered with a file. "All wrapped up, sir?" Purbright smiled. "For now, Stokes. For now." He looked once more out the window at the fading light. The town was quiet, its secrets laid bare, but its spirit intact. And somewhere in that quiet there was hope.